Okay, let's unpack this. We often think about research, studies about people, as trying to be completely objective.
Right. Get the facts, minimize bias,
Yeah.
keep your own feelings out of it.
Exactly. But what if the researcher's own experience, their emotions, their body's reactions, even their personal history isn't a problem to be avoided? What if it's actually like a vital source of data?
That's exactly the powerful idea we're diving into today. This suggests that when you're trying to understand another person's experience, particularly on sensitive topics like mental illness,
Yeah.
your own subjective response isn't just background noise. It's an active part of the interaction. And understanding your reaction can actually unlock deeper truths about the other person and, well, the shared space you're in.
So our mission today is to explore this through the lens of a really fascinating research article. We're doing a deep dive into a paper from the Journal of Research Practice by Brigitte Hansen and Bettina Devereaux. They looked at how combining two specific approaches, psychodynamics and autoethnography, can help researchers use their own subjective experience as like a core methodological tool.
Yeah, the core idea is simple, but pretty profound. Use insights from psychodynamics to understand the often unconscious emotional dynamics and relationships that happen between people.
Okay.
And then pair that with autoethnography, which is a method using personal experience and introspection, often through, evocative writing, to explore the relationship between yourself, the person you're researching, and the context you're both in.
So why should this matter to you listening right now?
Well,
if you've ever tried to understand someone else's story, maybe navigated a difficult conversation, or just wondered why you react the way you do in certain interactions, this deep dive is going to give you a new perspective.
It really is. It argues that those gut feelings, even moments of discomfort, aren't just yours. They can be clues to what's happening in the interaction and maybe in the broader social world.
It shifts the focus from just the words spoken.
Exactly. To the entire, often subtle, emotional and relational dynamic between people.
All right, let's jump into the source material then. The article is grounded in a specific research project.
Yes, the authors drew on data from a larger project focused on understanding peer support for people living with severe mental illness.
Okay.
The project aimed to get at the real-world problems patients face and how peer supporters can help them find new ways to think about their lives and take action.
And this research wasn't just done in an office, right? It was out there.
No, absolutely. It took place in psychiatric wards and followed patients out into their lives after discharge, so very embedded.
And crucially, this project took a different view of mental health.
Yeah, seeing it relationally and contextually, not just as a clinical diagnosis. They focused on everyday life experiences and what they call subject-born knowledge.
Subject-born knowledge. So the knowledge you get just by living through something.
Precisely. And the article notes this approach was actually groundbreaking in a Danish context at the time.
So they're taking this really human lived experience approach.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine they faced some challenges trying to do this kind of research.
They did, yeah. Accessing patients who were hospitalized for the first time was difficult. Mm-hmm. And there's this persistent myth, particularly in some research circles.
What's that?
That people with mental illness have low narrative ability, meaning they supposedly can't tell coherent stories or articulate their experiences well.
Which the researchers found wasn't true in their experience at all.
Exactly. They found that overall, the people they interviewed were very willing, even eager, to talk and share insights into their lives, really pushed back against that stereotype.
That's important. Okay, so they're doing these interviews trying to understand complex experiences. Mm-hmm. They need a framework that goes beyond just analyzing the transcript, right?
Right, they needed something more. This is where the two theoretical strands come in.
Gotcha.
The first is the psychosocietal strand. This framework understands humans as being driven by unconscious dynamics. That's the psychodynamic part. But importantly, we're also shaped by and constantly reshaping our relationship with society and its structures.
So my personal story, my life history, isn't just about me. It's also kind of woven into the social dynamics around me. Mm-hmm. Family, community, even history.
Precisely. And a key point from this perspective, especially for research, is that the researcher's own subjectivity and life history are part of the research process. You, as the interviewer, you're not a blank slate.
Right, you're an active participant.
You're co-generating the data, the narrative, in that interaction.
So the interview is more than just Q&A, it's an interrelational space.
Exactly. And that's where psychoanalytic concepts like transference and countertransference become incredibly relevant.
Yeah, break those down a bit. Transference.
Think of transference like Unconsciously bringing your emotional blueprints from past relationships or experiences into a new interaction.
Yeah.
It shapes how you see and react to the other person, sometimes regardless of who they actually are in that moment.
So my gut feeling about someone might be more about my past than them.
It can be, yeah, or a mix. And countertransference is the researcher's own unconscious reaction to the interviewee's transference, or just to the interaction itself. It's your response.
Wow. Okay. So my reaction to something you say might be less about you right now and more about my own internal stuff being triggered.
Yes, it's a complex interplay of internal experiences and external reality. And the article notes that when interviewing people navigating, the complexities of mental illness, these internal images and emotions might emerge in ways that feel less clear, perhaps vague, or even unsettling.
Okay, that's the psychosocietal side, focusing on those under-the-surface dynamics.
Yeah.
What about autoethnography? How does that fit in?
Autoethnography is a qualitative method where the researcher uses their own lived experience and personal narrative as a way to understand a broader cultural or social phenomenon.
Ah, okay.
It often involves evocative first-person writing. Its goal is really to break down that idea of the completely detached, objective researcher.
By explicitly bringing yourself into it.
Exactly. Bringing in your subjectivity, your body, the specific research setting. It's about using the self as a lens.
Makes sense.
It involves introspection, looking inward at your own feelings, thoughts, reactions in the process, kind of exploring the boundaries between yourself, the person you're with, and the context.
Extrospection.
And extrospection, looking outward to see how your experience connects to or differs from broader social and cultural stuff. The method involves what the authors call social introspection and emotional recollection.
So really trying to bring everything in. Senses, feelings.
Yeah, bringing all your senses and feelings into how you analyze an interaction. You, the researcher, are seen as a noteworthy actor in making sense of things.
Which helps explain why parts of this article are actually written in first person.
Absolutely. That first-person voice is deliberate. It's part of the autoethnographic approach, aiming to show the personal, affective process the researcher went through. It invites you, the reader, to kind of step into that experience, reflect on the social and cultural context, see how it resonates with your own life, and become involved in the interpretation process itself.
Okay, so how do these two methods, psychodynamics and autoethnography, work together here? It sounds like a powerful combination.
It really is. Autoethnography, particularly through writing about personal experience, helps make that often hidden link between the personal and the sociocultural visible.
Okay.
When it's informed by a psychodynamic perspective, an autoethnographic text can actually help uncover the subconscious dynamics that were active in the interaction. The researcher deliberately taps into their own life experience, inner images, even feelings or fantasies stirred up by the interview.
And here's the key move, right? Using their own reactions.
This is it. They propose using the researcher's countertransference, those unconscious reactions to the interviewee, not as a problem to be managed, but as a valuable source of insight that can supplement standard methods.
Wow. So your own unconscious reaction is a data point that kind of flips things on their head.
Yeah, it really does.
Let's look at how this actually played out in their research, specifically with the case of Mary.
Right. Mary, that's a pseudonym, was a woman hospitalized for the first time with a psychiatric disorder. The researchers' initial impression of their interview was, well, surprisingly positive.
The article quotes the researcher thinking, "I was happy. I smiled at Mary and said goodbye. The interview with Mary went very well." She was really impressed Mary shared so openly, given she was newly diagnosed and hospitalized.
And Mary's account of her sudden collapse is shared. She talks about feeling great, then suddenly falling, fainting, things going bang, her body getting worse, shaking inside, everything going black. She says, "What the hell is going on?"
And the researcher notes being particularly struck by the way she talked about her body.
But here's where the confusion set in. Over the next few weeks, as the researcher worked with the transcript, that positive feeling, it just faded.
Oh.
The text itself felt incoherent, disrupted, difficult to comprehend. It just didn't match the sense of connection and clarity she felt during the actual interview.
That's a real disconnect. Experience versus the data on the page.
Exactly. And the researcher remembered advice from a professor. From a psychoanalytic view, the researcher's subjectivity is integral. You have to involve yourself in the interviewing and the interpretation.
The relationship itself.
Right. The relationship itself co-produces the narrative and can reveal plural meanings, multiple layers of understanding. The researcher needs to allow themselves to be influenced, even provoked by the interaction.
But how do you make sense of that gap? That disconnect. How do you use that confusion or discomfort as a tool?
This is where the discomfort becomes absolutely crucial. The researcher describes presenting an excerpt from Mary's interview in an interpretation workshop with colleagues.
Okay.
The group read the text aloud.
And the excerpt included Mary's talk of chaos, feeling she couldn't be anything for anybody, so I could just be, just exist. And her physical struggle, trying to escape from my own body. Powerful stuff.
Very. And the group had various reactions trying to interpret the text. One felt it reflected a chaotic situation. Another thought Mary might be talking unclearly, trying to hide something. Typical interpretative moves.
But the key observation wasn't just about the text. It was what happened in the room as they read.
Yes, exactly. The researcher noted how quickly Mary's bodily feelings were transferred from the text to us, to the group itself, and how the group seemed to reproduce her feelings of discomfort. We felt slightly unwell, emotionally and bodily.
Wow, so the group physically felt the discomfort described in the text. That's intense.
It is. And the researcher realized the shared discomfort wasn't just about the words on the page. It was a signal. It belonged to the original interview situation.
A clue.
A clue. It could reveal something important about the dynamics of the interview, about Mary's experience, their relationship, and even about suffering with mental illness in the shared social and cultural space.
So the discomfort wasn't a problem to be ignored or fixed. It was data. A signal.
Precisely. From this perspective, feelings aren't just individual internal states. They are shaped by and reflect both our inner reality and the outer social world, right? They are products of transference, our unconscious reactions, wishes, fantasies.
And the discomfort the group felt mirrored the researcher's own lingering sense of unease with the text, even though the interview felt positive at the time.
Exactly. It validated her own feeling that something wasn't quite captured by the transcript alone.
This sounds like it prompted the researcher to really shift her approach then.
It did. She describes feeling a sense of frustration, sighing over the lack of understanding she got just from the text. She realized her focus had been too narrow just on researcher and the text.
She needed to broaden it.
Yeah, to researcher and the context, specifically the complex relationship she had with Mary during the interview. It wasn't just about analyzing the words, but analyzing the dynamic, the whole interaction.
It sounds like a moment of methodological challenge, right? How do you actually analyze a dynamic and emotional game, as psychoanalytic methodology might call it? That seems tricky.
It is tricky. Reaching the deeper, less obvious meaning, what's sometimes called the latent meaning, requires looking at the processes between people where unconscious wishes and fears influence the interaction. And she realized standard field notes just summarizing the conversation weren't enough to capture this subtle emotional game.
She needed a way to surface her own internal experience during that interview, the stuff that wasn't in the notes.
Yes, exactly. She needed a method to acknowledge her own transformations, face the feelings the interview stirred up in her, and use that as an epistemic process, a way of actually advancing knowledge, not just reflecting.
So the focus shifted squarely onto the research relationship itself.
Right. Her reactions to Mary and her story, recalling her own emotions, the quality of that shared interrelational space.
But the article is clear. This isn't therapy, right? They draw a line.
Absolutely. Very clear on that. This isn't about diagnosing the interviewee or interpreting their psyche for their benefit. It's about using the researcher's experience as a tool for understanding the interaction and the phenomenon being studied in this case, the experience of mental illness in a social context.
So key questions for the researcher became things like, had she truly seen Mary as unique? How did her own presence, her interest, her listening affect the trust and the story Mary told?
And can this relational focus truly access the deeper, sometimes unconscious social meaning active in the situation? That was the big question. She decided to use autoethnographic techniques inspired by the method to revisit and represent the experience of that first meeting.
Okay, this is where we get into that really powerful narrative section in the article, My First Meeting with Mary Revisited. It reads very differently.
Yes, it's a deliberate use of evocative sensory language to bring the imager back to life. She describes meeting Mary in the parking lot, walking past housing blocks, the smell of spring flowers in the hall.
The golden kitchen, green tablecloth, white candles, fragrant flowers. The delicate watercolors by Mary and her daughter. It sounds cozy.
Exactly, setting the scene. But alongside the setting, she includes her own internal state, her anxieties leading up to it.
Right, like, I feel that I'm still a little tense. I do not know how much Mary will tell me. Will she even tell me about herself? Will she say anything at all? You feel that uncertainty.
And the vulnerability of the researcher comes through. How can I ever believe that a woman who has experienced insanity, madness, will tell me about it? Mental illness is still a great taboo topic in Denmark. How can I be so naive? She describes feeling ripped out of my mind.
That's the autoethnographic process right there, making the personal, the societal anxieties explicit. Then Mary starts telling her story.
Sometimes laughing shyly about her odd experiences, talking about the chaos, not being anything for anybody, just needing to exist.
And the part about trying to escape her body, and the body, funnily enough, following her, the researcher notes Mary laughs as she says this, which contrasts so sharply with the horror the researcher feels internally listening to it.
Exactly. The researcher's own bodily and emotional reaction is captured here too. She feels relief, sinks into the chair, is captivated, but also reflects on Mary's body collapse. Imagine that your body can take control over your life. Strange, weird, frightening.
The horror of potentially being misdiagnosed.
Or horror of thinking you're physically ill, but it's mental illness. She notes Mary's fear, her struggle with her body, and again describes her own physical response. I sink further down into the chair, feeling the weight of it.
So this detailed, evocative writing wasn't just, creative writing. It was a method, a way to access and capture her own experience during the interview.
Exactly right. The insight from writing this narrative was realizing that every interaction with another person triggers something in you, the researcher. These bodily feelings, these cognitive reactions, they aren't findings about the other person per se.
They are about the interaction.
They are sources of insight about the interaction itself. The methodological challenge is figuring out how to turn those subjective reactions into useful research understanding.
It also revealed a contrast, didn't it, between what Mary brought and what the researcher expected.
Yes. Mary was incredibly open, sharing painful events, vulnerability, expecting, it seems, to be received and heard. The researcher, perhaps unconsciously influenced by societal stigma about mental illness, might have expected more distance, less openness.
But she didn't get distance.
No, she was pulled into the space between them, sensing the other's experience, the situation, the phenomenon of navigating mental illness. She felt the discomfort of Mary's struggle. Her low self-esteem seemed to, permeate the space. She felt a sense of humility and powerlessness listening to Mary's mental problems of the body.
And the transference came into play here, too, feeling Mary's experience.
Yes. The researcher felt something akin to Mary's bitter experience of thinking a physical illness was mental, an experience that was clearly anxiety-provoking for Mary, and through this interaction became palpable for the researcher, too.
It's worth remembering Mary's background here. A 50-year-old woman, normal life, good job, daughter, friends. This isn't someone easily stereotyped.
Absolutely. And that contrast is key. It highlights how Mary's story taps into a basic fear. Many of us have the fear of becoming mentally ill, of losing control, of losing contact with the familiar world and society.
The article even mentions stats about adolescent mental health and the taboo and the consequences, like exclusion from work.
Right. The OECD stat about people on disability for mental illness rarely returning to work. It highlights the real-world impact of societal prejudice, ignorance, myths, leading to stigma, exclusion. It's hard to stay involved or get a new job. Stigma really damages quality of life.
So Mary's personal struggle with her body and the chaos she felt resonated because it touches on these broader societal anxieties and the very real damaging issue of stigma.
Yes, the process of transference and maybe a lowering of bodily boundaries in that interaction made the researcher feel her own anxiety, Mary's anxiety, and this societally shared anxiety about facing mental illness. It revealed how deeply embedded mental illness is within our cultural and social contexts.
This is such a powerful insight gained through this very personal, reflective process. But then the researcher took this autoethnographic narrative back to the interpretation group, and things got complicated again.
They did. It wasn't smooth sailing. The group's reaction to the narrative was striking. The article mentions astonishment, questions like, what's at stake here? Where are you as a researcher? And that really pointed question, you should distance yourself.
Ouch. After pouring herself into this empathetic narrative, being told to distance herself must have felt like a rejection of the whole method.
It did. The researcher's initial reaction was irritation, a feeling that they just didn't understand what she was trying to do. But revisiting her notes on that group discussion sparked a new hypothesis.
And the hypothesis was about subjective disintegration. That sounds intense.
Yes. She hypothesized that The group's difficulty with Mary's description of her body, her suffering, the collapse, the repetition, and the discomfort they felt might actually mirror what could be happening for Mary. A potential subjective disintegration, a feeling that her core sense of self was breaking down or fragmenting.
And that feeling was deeply uncomfortable for the group to sit with.
Exactly. Perhaps because it taps into a very fundamental fear of losing one's own sense of stable identity. It's disturbing stuff.
And the group tried to make sense of it by connecting Mary's struggle to external life events, like her divorce, her friend dating her ex.
Right. They looked for understandable reasons for this distress, what the article calls culturally known and recognizable problems. Losing key relationships could absolutely shake someone's ontological security, that basic trust the world is predictable, threatening their identity.
So they framed Mary's struggle as this fight to regain herself, between needing connection, someone for somebody, and needing to be independent, autonomous subject.
Yeah, trying to fit it into a familiar framework. But then the researcher had a critical moment of reflection, a really important one.
An ethical pause.
Yes, exactly. She realized that by doing this kind of analysis, interpreting Mary's psyche based on the narrative and the group reactions, she was venturing into territory that felt like interpreting another person's psyche or motives.
Which felt wrong in a research context.
Right. She recognized this as potentially ethically reprehensible within the research context. This wasn't therapy. Mary's individual subjectivity wasn't the research object in that diagnostic way. It made her really question her own analytical moves and motivations. Why was she doing this analysis?
So this whole process, from the initial positive interview feeling to the confusing text, the discomfort in the first group, writing that deeply empathetic narrative, the challenge in the second group, and now this ethical pause, it sounds incredibly complex to the researcher. A real journey.
It absolutely was. She describes it as moving from an initial withdrawn position to experiencing transference and identification with Mary, which then led to anxiety and disturbance for herself.
She knew the standard advice.
Yeah, she knew not to reduce patients to diagnoses, knew empathy was needed for that subject-borne knowledge, knew patients are vulnerable. She expected communication might be difficult. She tried to create space to contain Mary's feelings, the despair, insecurity, fears. But the story, the situation, made the researcher feel helpless, humbled. Standard approaches weren't fully capturing it.
The first group session, where the shared discomfort emerged, that was a key signal then.
Yes, the group's difficulty with Mary's body talk mirrored her own discomfort. And writing the autoethnographic narrative was absolutely crucial for her to really understand her own discomfort and the depth of her identification with Mary.
By writing, she could feel her way back into the experience.
And recognize common and recognizable human emotions in Mary's story. She realized how shared the social context of mental illness is, and how easily, perhaps, someone could find themselves in a situation like Mary's. This writing process helped her see the sameness in Mary's otherness.
Acknowledging their shared humanity.
Exactly.
And this feeling of shared humanity, this identification, that helped bridge the gap between the confusing text and the felt experience of the interview as a dynamic event.
It did. The transference and countertransference related to the disturbed body helped her connect the dots between the disrupted text and the lived experience of the interview as context. The writing facilitated this identification process.
But the second group session brought a new kind of disturbance, focused on her identification.
Yes, that was the twist. When she presented her empathetic narrative, the group identified the empathy, sure, but they seemed to resist sharing it. Their reaction, telling her to distance herself,
Felt like countertransference.
Yeah, the researcher interprets it as a possible countertransference. Perhaps they were redirecting the disturbance or identification they felt onto her, telling her to contain it, to create distance.
That sounds really tough, feeling alone with that intense identification after doing all that work.
It was. She describes feeling alone, irritated, even angry at having to kind of carry that identification by herself. But the group's reaction, this countertransference directed at her, became the critical turning point.
How so?
Their feedback forced her to introspect about her own autoethnographic text and her process within the group setting. It wasn't just about Mary anymore. It was about her relationship to the material and the group's relationship to her. Like the article says, disturbance disturbs. It kept rippling outwards.
So the disturbance multiplying across the interview, the text interpretation and the group interpretation led to the breakthrough.
Yes. She realized her strong identification with Mary, while crucial for understanding sameness, had also made her blind to the boundary work, the crucial differences between herself and Mary, between herself and the context, even between herself and the group.
The identification obscured the boundaries.
Exactly. Her unrecognized transference reactions had hidden those differences. The group's reaction, their countertransference to her identification, was the key that unlocked this blind spot. It revealed the tension field between them and allowed her to see the transference-countertransference dynamics that were active back in the original interview, where Mary's struggles were, in a sense, partly transferred onto her.
It helped her see beyond just the shared sameness to the important difference.
Yes. It allowed her to move beyond just identifying with Mary and trying to analyze her as if she were a research object to be figured out. By letting go of trying to control or define Mary's subjectivity, she could truly see the difference between them as distinct individuals navigating very different subjective realities.
Mary's reality involving that potential disintegration.
Right. A potential subjective disintegration, which the researcher recognized as maybe a subconscious survival strategy for Mary, a daily struggle to find new ways to maintain a sense of self. She could see this difference more clearly through the autoethnography and the group processing.
And this led to recognizing a more complex space between them.
Yes, it enabled her to acknowledge and work within that area of tension, that transitional space where, as the article puts it, proximity and distance, sameness and difference, as well as acceptance and rejection were sustained together. Not either, but both hand.
That's a really nuanced understanding of the research relationship. So bringing this all together, what's the core value of this combined approach, psychodynamics plus autoethnography?
The central value is shifting the focus from just analyzing the interview as a text to understanding it deeply as an interaction in an interrelational space.
Wow.
And this is achieved through practices like verbally recounting or staging the interview experience in an interpretation group, and, crucially, creating those autoethnographic texts for both personal reflection and group analysis. These texts deliberately bring in the researcher's bodily sensations, life experiences, and professional knowledge.
And the object of the research expands beyond just the person being interviewed then.
Exactly. The object of study now includes a dynamic, fluid space between the researcher and the interviewee, and even the dynamics within the interpretation process and the group itself. It's a much wider lens.
And focusing on that space provides deeper insights, more nuance.
Yes, it becomes the rich source of data, leading to much more nuanced analyses and representations of social and cultural phenomena. It specifically sheds light on how societal understandings of things like mental illness frame interactions and relationships.
Often unconsciously.
Often unconsciously, yeah. Manifesting through subtle, sometimes subconscious emotions and dynamics that subdued latent meaning that aren't immediately obvious from just reading a transcript.
Because acknowledging both the difference and the sameness in something like mental illness is difficult and often disturbing for us.
It really is. That discomfort can lead to simplistic categorizations, seeing people only as different or deviant, or it can lead to a kind of invisibility, a lack of recognition, effectively making their suffering unseen or misunderstood.
And the autoethnography helped navigate that tricky terrain.
It did. By explicitly including the researcher's bodily and sensory experiences, the autoethnography accessed the situatedness and the physical aspects of suffering. Mary's body spoke to her experience, and the researcher's body spoke back through feelings like discomfort.
It made the cultural expectations visible.
Yes, it highlighted those cultural expectations around having bodies that are in control versus bodies that seem to have unknown, perhaps frightening subjective powers. Bringing these bodily reactions into the group setting helped make mental disturbance feel less like something totally alien and maybe more like an aspect of shared human experience, even everyday life.
And the transference-countertransference dynamic was key to accessing those hidden layers all along.
Absolutely. The researcher captured and remembered more about the interaction than she was consciously aware of initially, and this unconscious information remained potent, stored as bodily sensations, like that lingering discomfort.
The analysis and first group session reinforced it.
Right, they reinforced the discomfort, maybe objectified it a bit. But writing the autoethnographic narrative was the real turning point for understanding it from the inside.
The writing helped her feel her way back into those bodily sensations, recognizing them as a legitimate source of knowledge, a path to understanding the sameness.
Yes, it allowed her to understand the sameness, her identification with Mary's human struggle. But initially, that strong identification actually prevented her from fully seeing the otherness, the significant difference in Mary's actual experience of subjective disintegration. She was too close, in a way.
And the second group session, with its resistance, provided the necessary jolt to see that difference.
Precisely. The group's countertransferential reaction to her closeness and identification forced a crucial introspection of her own narrative by others. This external analysis of her internal experience allowed her to finally see the otherness in the interview situation, recognizing the crucial difference in our sameness.
So this entire complex process, using conscious analysis, unconscious dynamics, bodily feelings, personal narrative, group reflection, it really enriched the understanding of that crucial interrelational space.
Immensely. It's an approach particularly valuable, the authors argue, for researching complex cultural situations, emotions, experiences, especially in professional settings involving diverse backgrounds and histories.
It sounds like it allows feelings to be part of the analysis.
Exactly. It allowed feelings to come alive in the analysis, enabling the researcher to be touched by, and crucially keep in touch with, the profound human strategies people use just to exist, how everyday life is lived, especially under difficult circumstances. It revealed dimensions of living with mental illness often hidden or excluded from public discourse.
It provides a rigorous way to work with those powerful, often unconscious processes of transference and countertransference that are, let's face it, probably always present when we try to understand others deeply.
They're always there. This just gives us tools to work with them more consciously.
This deep dive has really shown us how bringing the researcher's full subjective experience, their feelings, their body, their history, isn't a flaw or bias to eliminate,
No.
but potentially a powerful tool for gaining deeper, more nuanced insights, especially when exploring sensitive topics and understanding the complex, often unspoken dynamics between people.
It fundamentally challenges that old idea that objectivity always means detachment. It suggests instead that profound understanding sometimes requires engaged subjectivity, really knowing what you bring to the table.
So think about your own interactions after hearing this. How much of what you understand about another person comes not just from their words, but from those subtle feelings, those gut reactions, or even physical sensations that arise in the space between you?
It really invites you to pay attention to those moments of connection or confusion or even discomfort in your own life. They might be telling you something important.
Because if professional researchers grappling with incredibly challenging topics like severe mental illness can find that their own discomfort, their own vulnerabilities can actually be the key to unlocking deeper truths about others and society.
What might your own subjective experiences reveal about the world around you if you started paying attention in a new way?